Today we're talking about some very new exciting features with version 11 IPA. We have Mr. Jeremy Stoltzfus and Mr. Jeff House here with us to present today. So thank you everyone, and now for our presenters.
Thank you. Thanks Jackie, and thanks everyone for joining us. And today we're going to spend some time talking about some of the new features that are in Infor Process Automation version 11. So let's get started. First up, so we have a new updated HTML5 interface. So in version 10, you could do most of the stuff within the web. However, they've updated it. It's all fresh, new look to fit into the Mingle 12 framework and color scheme and all of that stuff. All of the features that you can do in Rich Client are now available in the web, including access to some of the service definition and that type of stuff.
So if you want, for maybe like those users that are just doing tasks and users for your user actions, they don't necessarily need a Rich Client installation anymore. Just send them right to this web interface, and it's a lot more friendly for them.
Right. Part of that is a new feature within looking at your process definition screen. So you're going in, looking at all your defined processes, whether they're application defined or user-defined processes. There's a new view button that's next to the list of processes. And what that does is actually brings up an online viewer. So it shows you the process as it's defined. It brings up the latest version of the process. And you can actually go in and look at all the properties of every single node and just look at it as the process is designed. This is a read-only view right now. But it does allow you, again, to share that information if you've got folks that are looking at processes but don't need to be designers. This is a perfect way to give them that access without them having to install the Process Designer tool on their desktop.
And you can also use this for the previously defined versions of your flows. So if you want to see what was in version 1, your initial crack at it, you can go into the user application or system defined processes and view it there as well, without having to download it and use the designer.
Right. So some of the new additional new features. So there is a new type of channel. So many of us are familiar with using channels, especially the file channels seem to be the most popular. There's now a user channel, which allows you to define and set up. And there's 4 basic pieces of information that you can, 4 basic functions of the user channel. The first one, so you can send an email to the system and ask for, give me the status of all of my requests. So think of like the GHR application where you may have several open action requests on your employees or things like that. You send an email, the system will respond to you and say, okay, this transfer action, here's where it's at. And any other requests, including scheduled actions that you may have and the status of that. You also have the ability to kick off a process using a service trigger. So you can actually trigger a process flow just by sending the system an email. A great use for this is, you know, you've got processes, maybe some interfaces that run dependent as a part of a user's work stream.
An on-demand interface.
Yeah, it's an on-demand interface. So example, payroll. Payroll run isn't necessarily always complete at the same time, so It's something that you can't schedule, but you want that payroll staff to be able to initiate this. So this is a way that you can set the system up to allow them to send an email to the system and trigger that a process.
And in payroll, you can replace that WFWK screen, which is functional but can be a little bit cumbersome for some people. So right. An email is definitely a lot more within everybody's comfort zone.
Right. So you can also send the system an email requesting just general system status. This just kind of gives some real high level status to say things are running smoothly or if things are backed up maybe a little bit. And then finally, you can email the system asking for the status of a specific work unit. All of these things are based on the subject of the email. The system then parses it out. So in the case of a work unit, you have to have that work unit number in with a keyword, and the system will then go back and look at that work unit. It'll tell you if it's processing, it'll tell you if it's completed, if it's waiting for a user action, it'll report back and say, okay, here's where the work unit's at, waiting for somebody to approve or take action on that. So within the process designer itself, as you can see here, there's not a whole lot of changes to the designer. The layout and basic functionality is pretty much the same. Where we start talking about new features then is we get into there's a lot of new nodes. So continually adding nodes and enhancing the functionality of existing nodes within the designer.
And one thing to note about the process designer is it's now downloadable from a URL rather than having to go out to the Extreme site and download the version specific to your landmark environment.
Still installed as a ipd.jar file as the
Correct.
existing designer, but as Jeff said, it's just a URL that you can go to and it'll download it directly as opposed to going out to the support site. So let's take a look at some of the nodes that we have. First up is the file access node. So just a minor change here, which now gives us access to the Amazon S3 cloud. So for cloud customers, you can now interact with files that are sitting out on your cloud server, sending and receiving and writing to and reading from files.
The sub-processes, have you ever wanted to write, you have something that's repeated so much, like maybe looking up something about a user or an employee, I mean anything where you're like, boy, I have to incorporate this into my flow yet again. So copying some text or JavaScript from your old flow certainly works. But now we can put it into a sub-process where numerous flows can call the sub-process and incorporate it into our main process. Basically a subroutine. So if there's something that's repeatable, consider using this sub-process. We'll caution you though about using it in the designer, that when you're running it through the designer, debugging can be a little tricky with the sub-process, but generally your sub-process is working properly if you set it up. All the variables between the two are interchangeable, so they do pass back and forth. It's a wonderful feature.
Yeah, because it all processes in memory, any variable that you've defined in your parent process is available then in your sub-process and vice versa. One thing to note as you're setting these up here, so this top screenshot is the generic of the flow that we're defining as a sub-process. There's now this process type field, and we just check this checkbox to indicate to the system that it is a sub-process. Then in your flow that you want to call that sub-process, you use the sub-process node, and the system will, this drop down here will know the flows that are defined with this checkbox and present them to you in this list for you to pick from. And then that information's all there for you to run. Next up, we have a new SMS node. Because we flood our inboxes, email inboxes, with too many notifications and alerts, now we can flood our cell phones with text messages and alerts. So this does require a third-party account set up with Twilio. You can go online and register for a free service account for use for testing. It does send little tag marketing messages in the bottom of any message that gets sent out. But you can see here, you go in, you register that account, you get an account SID and a token that you then supply in your configuration, your system configuration, either within Rich Client or on the web, and the phone number that's associated with that as well, that account as well. All the APIs that Twilio publishes are built into this SMS functionality within Process Flow. Then in your flow, when you use it, after it's set up, you're just selecting users the same way that you would select users for a task. So for a user action node, so you can pick a task, and again, the system knows who's assigned to that task, and will look up the actor records and pull the mobile number that's designated on the actor record. There is a checkbox on that actor record to say SMS enabled, so it does require that in order to receive those text messages. So it looks like we have a question.
Hey, Jeremy. We do have a question from the audience. Can you use your own in-house SMS?
Good question. So I think because the APIs are all written and embedded within the application to use the Twilio service, Everything's defined there. So I don't think so. I can't say for sure, though.
Okay,
Okay?
thanks.
Yep. Anything else on this?
Nope.
All right. One thing to note just about SMS, this came up a previous time that I had talked with some people about this. They said, well, why would I want to do that? Why wouldn't I just want to send alerts via email? And we kind of talked about it a little bit. And yeah, you know, we do send a lot of email alerts through process flows and whatnot. But maybe you have some critical failure point in your node, in your flow, or you are using a flow to monitor something and you want a more recognizable alert being sent out. I know personally when I'm working with people and people are emailing me and I know that it's a busy time, I'll say, okay, well, here's my cell phone, text me if it's important, because I'll see that sooner than I will just an email that comes in.
Or maybe like a timeout on a user action. This action is critical. We've timed out. Send a text message to the appropriate people. Hey, such and such didn't approve this action and it requires attention immediately.
Yeah.
And then send it back to them as a user.
So definitely some strategy along with this to figure out the best use. When do I send an email versus an SMS node? All right, so we'll take a look at the social node. For those of you using the Mingle Enterprise, or maybe the cloud customers that have Mingle Enterprise, you can now interact with the user's feed directly on their social Mingle homepage. So you can send it to a user individually, you can send it to a group, and just send alerts to the Mingle page. There is a new LDAP Query node. This allows you to query any LDAP, not just your Lawson LDAP. You could certainly use this to write some more advanced queries against your Lawson LSF LDAP. But you could also use this to connect to your corporate AD system to look up user information and properties. Maybe even use it as a driver for creating RM accounts, Lawson accounts on the back end.
That's right. I mean, you could see, if the user already has their Active Directory account set up, before you send them the notification, your account's ready to go, anything. But keep in mind that it is a query node. You cannot update the external LDAP system directly. You can only query. So keep your network guys happy.
Yeah. So another new node, and again, primarily for a cloud customer, there's actually two main reasons for this, but so we have a landmark admin node. And built into that is a DB import and a DB export command. Two basic use cases for this. Number one would be cloud customers who don't have access to command line to run some mass imports or mass exports against a landmark business class. Second use case for this would be if you're writing an interface flow. We all know that looping through record sets, doing an import, or looping through a data set, if you have a landmark transaction to query a bunch of data and you're pulling that in, looping it, and building out your file, we all know that's time consuming and takes time. Well, now you can run that DB export command against that business class, query that data, and get that data set much, much faster than you could. Same with the import, bringing that file in and passing it to this landmark admin node, running the DB import command, which of course runs a lot faster than looping through. So performance improvement thing here to help you utilize the system more for your interfaces.
Now this is wonderful. So we've had the SQL query node for a long time now, but the beauty of the new feature in version 11 is to be able to generate a CSV result set from your SQL query. So let's say we have 10,000 records. Now we could have used the database and written it out to a file, but maybe we don't have file access to our database, some of these other things. Now all we have to do is run our query, and then it generates in the output data variable a comma-separated list of everything returned from the query. Then we can either write it out to a file, parse it with JavaScript, do whatever it is that we need to do with that data, and the loop only executes one time rather than 10,000.
Right, so when you have this checkbox generated, it does not loop through each record. It's just a one-time grab the data and move on. And while we're talking about looping and data sets, this is not a new feature in version 11, but it is in a later release of 10.1.1. So just want to highlight it and point it out. Any of these looping nodes that are built into IPA now have the ability to specify a break condition. So you click on the end of that particular loop. So when you drag one of these nodes out, you get the start and you get the end piece. So you click on the end node of that loop, and you can specify any valid true false condition here. And that will basically allow you to break out of that data set loop at any point in time if a certain condition is met.
Maybe you only want to get one record.
Just to highlight, of course, building out with the Infor OS that's coming up and being released, part of the whole Mingle 12 and all of that, is the Infor document management system. So built into the framework is now this document management platform. There's a node dedicated to that where it allows you to add, update, retrieve, or delete documents from that storage location. There is a connection screen within your configuration, just like all of your other database and loss and connections defined in your system. So how do I get to version 11? So this is a in-place upgrade from 10.1.1. So right on top of your existing system, you can install it and upgrade directly to it. Does require LSF version 10.09, and Java 8 is now supported. And beginning with CU47 of Landmark 11, it's required. So that, of course, does require you to upgrade your LSF Java to Java 8 as well, which again is only supported in version 10.09. And that's it. At this point, we'll take any additional questions.
All right, we'll pause for a minute to allow our audience to enter any questions they'd like answered from our experts. In the meantime, we do hope you join us today at 11 a.m. Eastern. That's coming up. We have Accounts Payable Invoice Automation presented by Ben Nichols and Brian Ayers. At 1 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be talking Cloud Suite Financials and Supply Management, Supply Chain Differences, presented by Brittany Cruz and Michael Carnock. At 2 p.m. Eastern, MMIS Best Practices. That's presented by Bo Hunt and Sarah Concanon. And then finally, Jeremy returns to cap off this week of webinars. At 3 p.m. Eastern, we have IPA for Supply Chain Management, co-presenting with Stephanie Cole. We have one question to answer before we wrap up this excellent webinar on IPA 11. Talking about sending emails, or receiving emails, I should say. Can an external vendor send an email to kick off a flow?
Good question.
I guess as long as because when you trigger the flow via a user channel, you're sending to an email address. As long as that email address is accessible.
Yeah, so there's some configuration on the server to basically support SMTP messages coming in. So if that is exposed and open, then so there's always firewall issues with that type of activity. So.
Okay. Couple other questions here. Here's a note from one of our attendees. Heads up, there is an undocumented new node called Data Exchange.
Yes, I noticed that this morning and didn't have time to research it a whole lot to see what exactly that was doing.
All right. Hey, thanks for that heads up.
My guess is it's an exchange of data.
Yeah.
Sorry, joke. Bad one.
Here's the questions are flowing in. When updating to 11, do you need to upgrade the designer? And also, is there any conversion that needs to be done on existing flows?
So there is, as with every CU, there is a new version of the designer that's released. And again, with version 11, it's a URL to pull from your server that will download that directly to your desktop. There is basically, there's not really an upgrade. Your existing flows that are defined in your system will work. Obviously, when you save it, it's going to have any version 11 stuff added to it.
And then you might want to just go into manage processes and download all of your flows after they've been converted. So that way they'll open properly in the v11 designer.
Final question here. Can you explain a little more about the Java requirements?
Yeah, so the Java requirements, so Java 1.8, like I said, is now supported with Landmark 11 and LSF 10.09. The Java version has to match between Landmark and LSF, and that's because on your Landmark server, when it's installed, you are compiling those jar files that get ported over to your S3 environment, to your LSF environment, to enable that communication between LSF and Landmark. Because those jar files are compiled on your Landmark system under Java 1.8, they need to run under Java 1.8 on your LSF side. So that's why those Java versions have to match.
Okay, great. So that's the server-side Java versions, of course. And being that it is soon 2018, RPI, I think, can safely recommend Java 1.8 across the spectrum of Infor, Lawson products. Can you go back a slide? Thanks.
Another thing to note about the designer as well is now it's authenticating through the web layer versus going directly to the grid.
Correct.
Oh, yeah. Good info. Great, thanks. Okay, I think we want to wrap it up here.